Rose had always believed in love, but it wasn't until January 2020 that she truly set out to find it. On a quiet evening, she swiped through a dating app, her finger hovering over profiles. Most seemed either too good to be true or just plain dull. But then there was Max. His profile stood out. Photos of him and his golden retriever hiking, running, and enjoying life. He looked like someone who truly lived for adventure. Max liked her profile first. A few moments later, he waved at her. She hesitated for a brief moment, wondering if it was just another casual conversation. But when she waved back, a steady stream of messages followed. They had an instant connection, exchanging thoughts about everything from their favourite travel spots to childhood memories, even their fears. The conversation felt so easy that it was hard to stop. Hours melted away into days, and soon, the chatting was no longer enough. Max asked for her number, and they moved to another app. For a couple of weeks, they became inseparable online. But soon, Rose started to feel the pressure. She liked Max, but the constant texting was overwhelming. She needed more. So she asked, "When are you going to introduce yourself to me in person?" Max agreed to meet. They set a date, and Rose found herself standing outside his house one chilly afternoon, her heart pounding with anticipation. When Max opened the door, she was greeted by his dog, tail wagging furiously, and a warm, welcoming smile from Max himself. The connection they had over text translated effortlessly into real life. They spent hours chatting, laughing, and finding even more things they had in common. It felt easy, comfortable. After that, their connection grew stronger. A few days later, Max invited her on a proper date. He picked her up in his sleek Tesla, and they drove to a city a few hours away, enjoying a dinner together. It was romantic. Candlelight, soft music, and delicious food. The night was perfect, and as they walked back to the car, Max took her hand and asked,
"Will you be my girlfriend?"
"Will you be my girlfriend?" Rose's heart fluttered. She hadn't expected it to feel this right, this soon, but she agreed. Their relationship seemed to blossom effortlessly. Days turned into weeks, and soon they were spending most weekends together. Max's schedule was packed, but Rose understood. He worked long hours, and when he had time off, he spent it tending to his dog, doing house chores, and trying to squeeze in a bit of relaxation. Rose often visited him, cooking breakfast for Max and his dog, who adored her. And when she was too tired from work, Max would prepare dinner for her, taking care of her the way she wished someone would. It was simple, but it felt like the start of something special. But then came that winter morning, the one that would shift everything. It was a cold morning, the air biting with a chill that seemed to cut through to her bones. Rose, bundled up in layers, still felt the cold gnawing at her. She asked Max if he could turn on the heating. Max, lounging on the couch, barely looked up.
You
can always go home, he said, his tone sharp and dismissive. Rose stared at him, confused. "Did you mean that?" she asked, hoping for a joke, a softer reply. Max didn't budge. If you're cold, you can leave. I'm not turning on the heat for you." His words stung. They didn't just hurt, they cut deep. This wasn't the man she thought she was getting to know. Rose didn't know what to say. She wanted to argue, to ask why he didn't care. But instead, she decided to leave. She packed her things quietly, and when she looked at Max for any sign of remorse, there was nothing. He simply watched her, unbothered. Days passed without a word from him. No apology, nothing. Rose couldn't understand it. She reached out to him, asking why he'd been so cold. His response was chilling. "I guess we're over," Max texted. "I know, deep down, there's no reason you'd love a man like me. I'm older than you, and you don't even like my dog." Rose was stunned. She had never once shown dislike for his dog. And as for his age, it didn't matter. She cared for him. But his words made her question everything. Why was he pulling away like this? Max eventually apologized for his harsh words, but he never really tried to make things right. His actions spoke louder than his apologies, and Rose realized that perhaps they were better off apart. Still, Rose wasn't ready to give up on love. She went back on the dating app, hoping to move on. That's when she met Rio. He was everything Max wasn't. Charming, easy to talk to, and genuinely interested in her. Rose liked Rio, not just for his looks, but for his personality as well. They quickly became close, and after a few days, Rio asked her to be his girlfriend. She agreed. But as much as she liked Rio, something about him didn't feel right. He cared a little too much about his appearance, always looking in the mirror or adjusting his hair. Rose found herself questioning if it was all too perfect. One day, while working alone on her laptop at the beach, she saw Max walking along the shore with his dog. The moment the dog saw Rose, it ran straight to her, wagging its tail excitedly. Max followed behind, and the three of them began to walk together, just like old times. The comfort of being with him, even for a brief moment, reignited feelings Rose thought she had buried. But she didn't act on them. She was in a relationship with Rio now, and she didn't want to betray that. Max reached out again, inviting her on a camping trip. Rose told Rio about it, but didn't mention Max. Rose felt distant due to the circumstance of their breakup, but she still didn't want to lose the connection she had with him. The camping trip was a turning point. Rose and Max spent 2 days reconnecting, walking through hills, exploring wildlife, and just enjoying each other's company. It was clear they still had a strong bond. Rose's feelings for Max were undeniable, but she didn't want to jeopardize her relationship with Rio. On this fateful day, Max picked Rose up as usual, and together they drove to the forest with his dog. They enjoyed the serenity of the place, walking through the trees, taking in the fresh air, and marveling at the beauty around them. They hiked up the hill, talking and laughing, until the sky began to lighten with the first hints of dawn. By the time they returned home, it was nearly daybreak. What Rose didn't realize was that this day, this simple, peaceful outing, was the breaking point for her relationship with Rio. He had become distant lately, but it was this walk, the time spent with Max, that finally made Rio confront the fact that Rose wasn't fully his. Rio broke up with her the next day, telling her she didn't know what she wanted. Rose was devastated. She tried to salvage their relationship, but Rio grew more distant each passing day. Rose was left feeling distraught and shaken, not ready to lose Rio. She called him, hoping to talk things through. She explained the situation, promising to cut all ties with Max in an effort to restore their relationship. Rio was initially adamant, holding firm in his decision, but after some time he reluctantly agreed to see how things would go. During this period, Rose kept her interactions with Max at a distance while she focused on trying to repair things with Rio. However, Rio seemed to withdraw further with each passing day. Rose only managed to see him once every 2 weeks, despite repeatedly trying to arrange a meetup. Rio always had an excuse, mostly revolving around work, and his lack of availability made Rose feel even more isolated. Loneliness crept in, and in those moments of emptiness, Rose found herself turning to Max for companionship. Max, who had once been distant, was now putting in more effort than ever. He took her on walks along the beach. They went to the movies together, and whenever they could, they enjoyed each other's company. It was a pleasant distraction, but deep down, Rose knew her heart still belonged to Rio. As her birthday approached, Rose desperately wanted to spend the day with Rio. Even though she was growing closer to Max, their bond was still that of friends, and nothing more. She had hoped that this special day would reignite their connection. On the night of her birthday, Rose arranged a beautiful dinner at a prestigious restaurant, a reservation for 2. She and Rio both looked astonishingly beautiful, and for the first time in weeks, Rio seemed genuinely happy and supportive. They laughed, enjoyed each other's company, and after dinner, they went on a mini celebration, visiting different bars and restaurants for the next 3 days. It was a brief but much needed reprieve, and Rose felt a sense of hope again. But after her birthday, Rio reverted to his old distant self. His coldness resurfaced, leaving Rose confused and heartbroken. Despite many attempts to talk things through, Rose and Rio eventually decided to call it quits. Their relationship had fizzled out, leaving Rose vulnerable and unsure of what to do next. As fate would have it, Max had recently quit his job, and his new role demanded much of his time and attention. This shift in his life left him with little space to spend with Rose. Max and Rose were only able to see each other on the rare days when Max didn't have work commitments. This started to wear on Rose, leaving her feeling increasingly depressed. They had very little time together, and whenever Rose tried to arrange a hangout, Max was unable to give her a clear response about whether he could make it or not. As the days passed, Rose began to see a side of Max she had never noticed before, a selfishness that had quietly seeped into their relationship. Max worked long hours, often every day, focused on earning as much money as possible. Yet, despite his wealth, he spent a significant portion of his pay on hiring dog minders, needing someone to care for his dog while he was away. Rose, wanting to be supportive, offered to watch his dog for him on several occasions, but Max always declined. It became clear to Rose that Max constantly professed his love for her, yet his actions didn't reflect those words. The emotional gap between them widened. Rose tried to talk to him about it, to express how his behavior was affecting her, but every time she did, he became defensive, quick to brush off her concerns with hurtful words. In those moments, Rose began to realize that Max's attitude was starting to resemble something darker, a narcissism she hadn't seen before. This realization began to chip away at her, leaving her feeling more and more hopeless about ever finding the kind of love she was searching for. In an effort to cope, Rose started spending more time on her own and occasionally hanging out with friends. She had stopped visiting the dating site, opting instead to focus on finding happiness in other ways. But even as she tried to move forward, Max, who seemed to lack any real self-awareness, continued to act as though he was doing everything for her. He made a big show of working hard to earn enough money to buy a ring and marry her. But when Rose brought up the growing distance between them, Max snapped. He flared up in anger, throwing out hurtful words that cut deep. At this point, Rose couldn't take it anymore. She realized that no matter how much he said he loved her, Max's actions spoke louder, and they weren't the kind of actions she needed. Rose found herself alone, questioning if love would ever truly work for her. One weekend, Rose went to see Max at his house. They talked, really talked. For the first time, Max opened up about his fears, his regrets, his love for her. But Rose saw something she hadn't before. Max wasn't ready for love, not the way she needed. He wanted her, but only when it was convenient. He loved her, but never enough to truly change. So when she returned home, she made a choice. She let him go. In the end, neither love had been right. Heartbroken but free, Rose turned to art. She painted, she embroidered. She took long walks by herself, finding beauty in the solitude. For the first time in her life, she realized she didn't need a man to complete her. She had herself. And that was enough. Love will come in its own time, but never at the cost of your own worth. Rose stopped seeking validation from others and instead began to validate herself. She even bought herself a new car, a symbol of her newfound independence. And most importantly, she learned that love would come when the time was right, and that she didn't need to force it. It was better to be single and at peace than in a relationship where her feelings were dismissed. And so, Rose continued her journey, not searching for love, but embracing the love she had for herself. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe for more.